Welcome everybody to the Spiritual Direction Certificate webinar on Help Others Flourish in a Relationship with the Lord. My name is Greg Shapiro. I am the admissions advisor here at Divine Mercy University, and I've been in this role advising for the SDC program not too long. Well, I only started back in late May or so, but before that I was enrolling for the Master's in Psych program here at Divine Mercy, and that began back in late 2020, and I've been actually enrolling within different grad programs for social services for almost 7 years now. So I have a bit of experience with this, but I'm the point of contact for those that are looking to start their program. With me today are Maria Brackett. She's our program director for the SDC program. And also we have Rebecca Kramr, who is just wrapping up her SDC studies. So I will pause here and allow for each of them to introduce themselves.
Thanks so much, Greg. It's great to be able to be here. Becky and Greg, thanks for being with us. We're really excited to have Becky with us, to have a student to hear a little bit about their perspective and of the program and what it's been like for them. As Greg said, I'm the program director here at the University of the Spiritual Direction Certificate, and I've been in this role now for a good 2.5 years, and as well as being part of the development team of the certificate. So Becky, why don't you introduce yourself and just tell us a little bit about you, like where you're from, what you do, what you spend your time doing.
Sure. Okay. My name is Rebecca Kramr, and I live in Texas. And I'm married for 28 years, have 2 children, call them children, but they're young adults now. One's married, one's in college. And I'm the Regnum Christi Women's Section Director here in our area. And I've enjoyed getting to, step back into the study world and being part of the Spiritual Direction Certificate program, and just finding that niche to where I can serve others in the church by helping, walk along the spiritual path with them. So this is really kind of filled a need that I didn't realize that I had, but something that's been very fruitful for me and obviously fruitful for others as well. So it's been something that's been really good for me for the past couple of years, and I'm looking forward to growing into this role and to helping others along the way.
Thanks so much. So you're a mom and a wife, a lay person. We've had in these different interviews that we've been doing here about the program and with students, we've had a deacon and a permanent deacon and a priest. And now it's great to have a woman and a lay woman here. So what drew you to this program, or what drew you to want to, start learning more about spiritual direction?
Well, I noticed several years ago, and just interactions with friends and people and acquaintances, at coffee or at lunch, it started to dawn on me that people would say, they would open up and tell me their stories and like reveal things that they were unaware that they were getting ready to reveal, and say, wow, I didn't realize that I was going to tell you that. And I said, I didn't realize that you would tell me something like that either. And I brought it up to my spiritual director, and she said, some people just have a really good gift for listening. So I really thought about that, and I said, I wonder what there is to this, this gift of listening. I didn't know that I had that within myself. And my own spiritual director said, maybe you should check into spiritual direction. And not feeling qualified for that myself, she said, there's a new program beginning with Divine Mercy University. You should look into it. And so I started to investigate it and said, this is something that I really would like to think about. I was drawn to it not only because of the spiritual aspect, but because of the human sciences. I have a science degree myself. And so it was compelling that it looked at the whole person, not just the spiritual aspect, but the psychological aspect as well, that I don't think they're separated. the person, and that was really important to me. So while I stepped into the program, and started learning more, I still didn't feel very qualified, which I think is probably a good thing. It kept me humble all throughout, which I think was very important to the learning process.
Wow. Thanks for sharing that, Becky.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like you felt, people were coming to you and kind of opening up and sharing about their experience in life, or, it's almost naturally you started to feel kind of drawn to this, I guess, feeling that things were aligning, that the Lord was sending you people. And so the program started in January of 2019. So I'm imagining you started then.
I did. I started with that first group, which was really great. It was a neat program to start. It was a step out in faith, having been out of the learning community for quite a number of years, and then to step into something that was completely new and distance learning. My own kids, one of them was in college, and so it was nothing new for her. And I'm saying, this is completely different for me. I'm used to attending class with people around me, and so doing something that's on the computer, and that was totally new. So I had to learn a new way of learning. But it was good. It was good. It allowed me to be able to fit that in around my schedule, it was challenging, but introspective for me as well. It helped me to grow as a learner, as a person. And also made me a lot more empathetic to those around me, especially my kids in college.
There you go. Right. Sometimes we think about our directees, but people often say, right, that just learning all these things helps all their relationships. Well, I guess if it helps us in our relationship with the Lord, it overflows in all those other relationships too. So, well, you're finishing up the SDC program right now. So I guess in general, I'll get down to some details, but what has your experience been like in the SDC program, just in general? You've spoken a little bit about it, like learning and the online and.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think the best thing about it has been the connections that I've made with different participants in the program. Being able to interact with them even remotely, and just glean the perspectives and information and insight into not only spiritual direction, but into their own relationships, and to learn from them. That's been a huge asset for me. Interactions that I might not have with a directee on my own. I may not have ever experienced a certain situation, but somebody else in the class that I've been in, somebody else might have. To be able to listen to their experience with that, and for me to be able to learn from that, has been just huge for me. And so I would say that's probably been the greatest asset, is to be able to learn from others throughout the process. And then to have just, very close connections with the instructors and the others, the others that are involved in providing support along the way, whether it's through the practicums. And that's been so beneficial. Reaching out at any time, really, with a question, outside of class, offline, whatever that might be, and to be able to have that support returned, that's been very beneficial as well.
Wow, that sounds great. Those connections, because sometimes people think when you study online that maybe you won't have that experience of connection or really building relationships, but it sounds like you did.
Yeah, it does feel that way at first. When you're in the trenches of a class, and you really desire to be able to bounce something off of the person next to you, or have a small group with a person, direct face to face, it does kind of feel that way initially. But when you realize that, you can take the time to collect your thoughts and to write it out and send that out and have that return to you in a meaningful way, that connection is actually there. It's virtual. And so it's a little different. But there are opportunities within the program to have that face-to-face meeting. I know that that'll come up in a little bit. And that's worth it, to be able to look forward to those times where you can meet the people face-to-face and know that, okay, this is a person I always see on the computer. This is really neat to be able to talk to them and chat with them one-on-one, and interact with them in other settings outside of the spiritual directions, program has been very beneficial as well.
Oh, yeah. So those relationships grow over time.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about, you've talked about, so was the online experience as difficult as you thought it was going to be? Or?
After the initial growth to learn about, the program, the platform that's used, and getting the structure of the class down, learning that things are, class runs from Wednesday to a Tuesday, that's a little bit different format than we're used to, in a traditional learning environment. Once you get the hang of it, so to speak, no, it's not that difficult. There's, scheduling the time to do the readings and that are required for classes, watch the videos, and post your responses and answer to other people. Just keeping your time frames in mind and working the schedules, or it's like any other class. When there's due dates, just the framework is slightly different because it's online. That's all.
Yeah, exactly. So what did you find the most difficult about the program and studying it through these years?
Probably I would say some of the texts, and it had nothing to do with the context of it. It was just, some of it was just difficult for me. I think, there are some church fathers who are just inherently more difficult to read than others. For me, that was true. I'm just, drawn to some, read some authors more than others. And, that's just a personal thing, I think. But, overall, I don't think that the program was, too difficult for someone called to be a spiritual director, someone with that, that gift and that charisma and that call in their heart. I don't think it's too difficult to follow. In fact, I think even if there's someone who feels like maybe I don't want their certificate, maybe I just want to learn more, I want to audit the classes, whatever it might be, the information itself is so valuable and so useful to everyday life and interactions with other people. It's just, it's very important, in our normal day-to-day interactions.
Yeah, that's true. So what did you find most helpful about the program? I mean, I know that you talked about the relationships and everything.
Sure. Yeah. It's made me, it's really instilled in me a desire to have such empathy for others. We never know where someone else is coming from, what's happening, where their story is. And so just giving them the benefit of the doubt and just having that empathetic heart for others. It's just so important. I don't know what's going on over there, and I don't know what the Holy Spirit is doing, in their life, and just knowing that, I don't know, that's been the overarching thing for me is, exhibiting that empathy for others. And that's been something that's been huge. Not that I didn't necessarily have that skill to begin with, but it definitely has been honed, to listen well, to listen with an empathetic ear, and that listening to others can be healing for them, and it's a very important skill.
Yeah, that deep listening, it sounds like, kind of like not judging, just kind of trying to interpret it, just trying to listen in order to understand.
Yeah.
Sounds like to kind of be with them where they are. So you talked a little bit about the residencies. You mentioned them as sort of that in-person experience. What were they like for you?
Yeah, sure. So the first one for my group that I was in was during COVID, and so it was virtual, but it was still a really good experience to be able to spend an extended period of time with that group of people, even though we were still virtual. It was still an immersive experience. The second residency was in person for me, and that was incredible to be able to be face to face with people. I remember one priest that was in one of my classes. I saw him for the first time in person, and I said, "Wow, you're much taller than you look like on the computer." So that was a neat interaction, to be able to see someone face to face, and to there's a different dimension, right, than being on the computer screen. But then to be able to practice, have these practical sessions with them, that was very valuable, because we practice, quite a bit in sessions online on the computer, but being able to have that in person, it's you can't replace that either, because so many spiritual direction sessions are in person, not virtual. And so that was a great value to the experience, is to have that one-on-one or small group session, and have that feedback then too from a staff member in person, real time right then on what was happening in those sessions as well. So it was good to be able to kind of touch base in person, so to speak.
So just to give the people that are on the webinar a little bit of context, and Greg did the great job of putting the slide up here about this, but we have 2 residencies here in Sterling, Virginia, that are part of the program. And they're basically like one a year if you go through the program at the regular pace, from a Wednesday evening to a Sunday lunch. And like Becky was saying, there's just a lot of learning with presentations by the faculty, and then those scenarios, those triads, where you sit with a faculty member and fellow students in a small group and run through some vignettes of spiritual direction and or mock sessions, and then where you get feedback. And the first residency really focuses on those basic listening skills, as Becky was mentioning. And then the second one goes deeper into the spiritual direction relationship and some of those deeper listening or situations that could arise as far as boundaries or relationship building as the spiritual direction relationship goes on. So just working through all those. They're intense moments, Becky, right?
Yes.
Everyone says that at the end. They're like, "Oh, this was great," but everyone's a little bit tired, even though their hearts are filled, seeing the others. But yeah, one student said something like, "You learn in a residency, all that you learned in a whole course," or something, just as far as how much learning goes on, as well as all the other aspects of seeing fellow students, and that retreat that we try to have on Saturday morning to give you time just to kind of go over the things in your heart with the Lord. And so a good packed filled time, but definitely I think it's just it's different than the online learning, even though it's very similar as far as the content and the practices, but just I guess to be able to have the opportunity to see each other and be in person just hones things a little bit better. What surprised you, Becky, about the experience of the program? Was there anything that you say, "Gosh, I didn't realize that this would be something I would learn, or that this would be something kind of a fruit that I would get from the program"?
I suppose for me, like I mentioned earlier, I went in kind of feeling insecure. Like, I don't know if I have what it takes to do this. I was feeling, outwardly validation. Yeah, you should really do this. You have these gifts, but inwardly I was thinking, I'm not really sure, and knowing that, God equips the called. He doesn't necessarily call the equipped. I kept that in my mind, like, just stick with it. He's brought you to this. There's probably something to this. He's gonna give you what you need to get through. And so I just kept kind of repeating that to myself. And I over and over again, there were lights presented. Like, okay, I can see the growth here in myself. I can see some confidence building here or there. And I liked what I was learning. I liked what I was hearing. I liked the classes. I liked that there was a good blend of spirituality and human sciences, like I mentioned earlier. I liked that that we were offered and I was going to say, with the residencies, especially the safe spaces to practice the difficult, what could be difficult in a spiritual direction session, so that we would have those experiences kind of to reflect back on if we had to face those in a real life session. And so, those were, I guess maybe those were a bit of a surprise, that I didn't expect those graces to come my way, because I felt, a little out of sorts in starting the program. But at the end, I felt, okay, all the tools are in my tool bag here. I feel kind of equipped. Do I feel like I know it all? No, absolutely not. I'm still learning. But I feel like, the tools have been given to me to head out and be, begin to be successful.
That's so interesting. Yeah, definitely something that I hear often, students saying that they feel confident. They don't feel like overconfident because they know it's sacred ground and the Lord is it's so much of the place of the Lord at work with the person, right? But they do feel kind of like you were expressing, that they do have what they need. It's a matter of using those skills and growing and continuing to learn. But there is a certain confidence by the end of the program, which is beautiful to see, right? And also, I think it's a confidence that comes because, just like you, many people start the program thinking, well, I think this is the direction I should be going in, but I guess in time I'll understand or I'll know, right? So I think there's also maybe a confidence that comes that the Lord kind of confirms it in your heart as you go along, right? And you're doing it.
Yeah. And even when there's, when you're actually, working with real directees, not just classmates and triad sessions, and you take the time to reflect and do case studies with those and present them back, and you can see the fruits in those sessions then, and think, okay, he is working, the Holy Spirit is working through this and revealing to me, helping to boost my confidence in it. Okay, this is working. This is fruitful, and this is an area I need to grow in, which has been beneficial too.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly. So you're talking about those like supervision sessions that you have when you start going through those practicum hours and start seeing people in spiritual direction. And then I imagine the experience that you are having now that you finished the program, just seeing people in spiritual direction and seeing that they are growing, that the Lord does make himself present there. I'm sure that's all very confirming, like you said. What would you say to a lay person?
Never ceases to amaze me the way the Holy Spirit shows up every time.
Right, exactly. It's funny because I guess I think it's comforting when he shows up and we understand that he's there, right?
Yeah.
What would you say to a lay person that's looking into our program? Because, there are priests in the program, permanent deacons, some sisters, lay consecrated, men and women. But what would you say to a lay person that's like a husband or wife but feeling kind of this tug to want to be a part of this ministry?
I would say that it's for everyone. I felt a little intimidated actually at first, being a lay person in class with priests and consecrated women and sisters and religious, but it was very comforting to be in class with them, in session, triad sessions with them, and realize that we were all journeying together. That was something that I had to particularly get over, that we're on a journey together, and we're all headed the direction that the Holy Spirit wants us to move. And so there's not a lot of difference. Maybe some people have had more formation in the past than others. But if there's a call to spiritual direction and there's a call to this particular program, then the Lord has a purpose for having you here. Whether you're a layperson, a priest, or religious, consecrated, the Lord's purpose is larger than your vocation. So, if that tug is there, answer the call, because he has something for you.
Becky, I have a question about that, by the way. I appreciate you sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
What has been the most beneficial part for you as a student in having your fellow classmates coming from different vocations and different sorts of walks of life, or places where they've come from, and have now, just like you, found the calling to serve as a spiritual direction? What has benefited you in having this sort of cohort of a mixture?
So, well, like I mentioned, it was something that I had to get over a little bit. My first assignment in a triad was I was the spiritual director to the directee, who was a priest. And I thought, how on earth are we supposed to do this? But it was in a vignette where there were scenarios that we had to play. And so it really wasn't him as a priest, it was him playing the role of someone else, And so you have to kind of move out of the mindset of the person as in their vocation to the person that they're portraying in the moment. And that was, I think that was kind of eye-opening, because that put me in a different perspective of, they're a learner too. I'm a learner and they're a learner too. And we're all in that same boat together as learners, and we all come from different vocations. And as I have something to learn from that priest as a learner, he has something to learn from me as a layperson. I'm a woman who's married. He's not a woman who's married, so there's something to learn, in that relationship for each of us. And that was really beneficial once I got over that little hump of, that little terror of, this is a priest and I have to offer him spiritual direction. So that was, some people may not have a problem with that. I didn't after that time.
So Becky, let's talk a little bit about how are you thinking to use this ministry or put in practice being a spiritual director? Who are you hoping to serve? Or
yeah, so one of the things we really talked about, I think it was in the last SDC 600 class and somewhat in the 500 class too, maybe it was presented there first, was about our boundaries and kind of, taking care of ourselves as spiritual directors. And that really got me to thinking about, who I wanted to serve and how often. And, I really feel called to serving women, in the area here. Like I mentioned at the beginning, I'm a section director here for Regnum Christi Women. And so I see primarily Regnum Christi women, but then I have some young adult women who I see also. I'm in a college town. So there are a few young women recently graduated from college who I see as directees as well. And so I think, that for me is where I've established my boundaries as, young women who've graduated from college up through, adulthood and Regnum Christi women. And, I'm really going to hold firm to that because I feel that that's where my comfort is. That came through a lot of prayer and discernment. Well, naturally we want to help people, and there are times where I think, oh gosh, that man could really use a spiritual director, but that's outside of my comfort. That's outside of where I've established my boundaries. So that maybe he needs a spiritual director, but it's not going to be me. I will gladly, turn him over to someone else. But it's very important to stick with that, to know what my lane is and drive in that lane.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah. Just because sometimes it can be difficult for people to imagine, well, when I am a spiritual director, who will I be serving or in what ways, right?
Yeah.
Even though here at the university, it's always getting calls of people saying, how could I find a spiritual director? So there are a lot of people out there looking for spiritual directors too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, let's hand it over to you, Greg. Is there anything that you wanted to ask or anything you wanted to say at this point in time? Or if we open up to questions or...
Oh, there we go. So I'm going to cover a little bit more of the details. But one question I do have for you, Becky, because you had mentioned a little bit earlier how in this program you found the psychological aspect being beneficial. So in your words, how would you describe it as being, how did it make it so much more beneficial? Because that is something that makes this program so unique from other spiritual direction programs out there. So how has it benefited you, and how do you see it benefiting you moving forward as a spiritual director?
Sure. Well, I think I always keep one of, I think it was Dr. Kathy's sayings from SDC 500 in the back of my mind. When a directee presents with something and it's not about what it's about, right? And I think there's always something deeper for the directee. And sometimes that's spiritual and sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's psychological. And so being able as a spiritual director to understand that there's a difference between the two, that there could be something else that's going on with that particular person that's maybe not a spiritual issue at all, but maybe something that they might be attempting to over spiritualize, but it might be a psychological issue. Being able to having that understanding and that little bit, that background knowledge, not that being a spiritual director, having gone through this particular program makes me any kind of professional at all. I'm not. That's why, it allows me to say, there's something outside of the spiritual aspect here that may be a different problem that might necessitate a referral to someone who is a professional. The training that we've received, at least the instruction in psychological development and a few of the issues that could prop up in spiritual direction sessions have alerted us that these are possible situations that could arise that could necessitate referrals, and to be aware of those things. So I think that's very beneficial, because sometimes in some training programs, I'm guessing that probably is not necessarily at the forefront. And so there could be some confusion maybe that comes in. Maybe there's some help that's needed that's quite possibly not sought or looked into for the directee. And I personally have a couple of directees that do have a psychologist and me as a spiritual director, and we talk about that openly. And there are a few times where I've said, this is probably something you might want to talk to your psychologist about, and because it's not in the spiritual realm, and they're okay with that, and that's a perfectly healthy relationship.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. I think you put it so well. Many times when I speak with folks that are looking into this program and will become potential students with us, it's very often that they'll ask, why would this be beneficial, having this sort of psychological component? And I share with them the same thing that you just shared, that it really can be helpful to have a better sense of maybe where the directee is psychologically. And of course, as you mentioned, this does not qualify someone to become a licensed professional counselor or a clinician, but they still have a little bit more of a sense of maybe where they are currently as far as their mental health. They can tap into a little bit more of a clarity of where they are at that moment. And if necessary, the director can perhaps even effectively refer them to a licensed professional if that's needed, especially if that's going to be helpful for them to better receive spiritual direction, as that can happen many times. Maybe there's something blocking them psychologically from hearing what the director is trying to guide them into, or helping them to find their way to the light. So anyway, that I think you shared it so perfectly, and that's exactly what I'd like to share with our potential students as well.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, what I'll do for now is just share with our guests a little bit about the ins and outs of the program. And again, I'm just going to remind everyone, if you have any questions, whether it's for me or for Maria or Becky, feel free to drop them in the chat section or the Q&A section. We'll be sure to get to those very shortly. But for a lot of you, you're here to also just learn a little bit more about the details and what to expect in the program. So just to share with you, we have 6 courses, and all of the courses are offered online. And Becky had mentioned that she made connections with her fellow students. So even though they're done online, and they're also done asynchronously. So for instance, that means you're not logging into Zoom so much as you're logging into your discussion boards and you're communicating that way. That camaraderie is still there. Every time I speak with students about it, they all say that they make those connections. But one of the other benefits of having it done online and asynchronously is that this gives you flexibility. It gives you the ability to log into your classes at whatever point works within your schedule. So if you're a student that maybe you best learn early in the morning before the world has woken up, but you're sort of at that peaceful time of the early hours, you can log in and participate at that point. Or if you prefer to maybe do it midday, or if it makes more sense for you to do it as the day is winding down into the late evenings, again, you can log in at those hours too. So you'll still have your assignments and your deadlines, but as far as your classroom participation, that's completely up to you as a student. And then, of course, also, as we mentioned, while all the courses are online, there are a couple of residencies, and there's also practicum hours. And so just jumping back to the residencies, as Maria had mentioned, there are 2 of these, and one happens during your 3rd course, so your 3rd term. The second one would happen during your 5th term. And the first one, as we shared, it's really a way for students to put into practice the skills and knowledge and the listening skills that they're learning. Whereas the second residency is designed for students to prepare for their practicum hours. These would be when you're actually active as a spiritual director and logging in your hours as you're completing your program. The residencies are done on campus. They're done here in Sterling, Virginia. And we're about a 5-minute drive from the Dulles Airport. So if you're flying in, we're just around the corner. And also students are lodged right next door at the Marriott Hotel. So everything is in very close proximity. So with that, just to cover the time commitment as well. So students are taking 1 course per 8-week term. So you're doing 1 at a time. And usually, this is not set in stone, but more of just a pattern we've seen with students. Usually they're committing somewhere between 6 to 9 hours per week. It could range depending on the course that you're in, the familiarity you have with the content, that sort of thing. But again, this is just more of a pattern. So if you're one that's a fast reader, it might take you less time. If you're one that likes to take your time absorbing the information, then expect to put in maybe 9-10 hours a week. Now with that, there are breaks between the courses that you're taking. So you're not taking a course back to back, but rather there's a lot of breathing room between your courses. So for instance, once you complete one of your courses for 8 weeks, you'll go into a 8, 9, 10-week break, depending on where we are in the academic calendar. So this gives students time to, if they wanted to reread the material, they could do that. If they wanted to just take a full step back and take that break, of course, that's something they can do as well. But it's also a good time for students to replenish their funds, or maybe to schedule their travel time or other major events around those breaks. And also just to highlight, the major holidays do fall during these downtimes as well. So Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter, these happen during these breaks in the program. And then, of course, it's also a 2-year program of completion in total. So right there, I'm going to pause, and I know that we have some questions coming in. So why don't we break into those? So we might have questions for Maria or Becky or myself. So I'll start with the first one. And one question is, I live in South Africa and wish to know about fees and how I would do practicals. So the practicum hours. So that's a great question. So let's talk about the cost for just a moment. And on the screen, we have the tuition. So the cost per course is $778. And there may be room to reduce it, by the way, if you work in ministry, if you're a volunteer at your parish, or with your diocese, or maybe even any other church-affiliated organizations, then there's room to bring the cost down by 10%. So hopefully we'll be able to speak one-on-one about this, and we can see if this is something that you're eligible for. But at a baseline, it's $778 per course. And then the cost per residency is $1,000, and that's going to cover your lodging. It's going to cover your most of your meals. It'll cover your materials. So the only thing that you're responsible for would be your travel and 3 of your dinners. But everything else will be covered under that $1,000. So another question came from Dante, and Maria, this might be a good question for you. So Dante asked, what would be the percentage of lay people serving as a spiritual director in the US? I know that might be a little bit tricky to quantify, but if you could just share your experience anyway as a faculty and spiritual director.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Dante. So there's not really an organization that collects all this data. So I think it's a little bit hard to be able to know that. I can tell you that in our program, I think it's 60% of the students are lay people. I just pulled the numbers recently. So that's what I can tell you about our program. But I don't know really in the US because there's not an organization that brings together that data just yet. Let's see if in the future there would be. And so that's what our kind of like our profile of our program looks like. So.
Great, good question. Good question, Dante. Michelle has a couple of questions, and her first question, Maria, this would be another good one for you. So she included a link, and I can't open that right now. And I think it's a link to another spiritual direction program, but she wrote, what are the differences between secular spiritual direction, and then she included the link, versus Catholic Divine Mercy University spiritual direction?
Yeah, so I see that link that Michelle's referring to, which is called Spiritual Direction International, which is kind of like a conglomerate of all different faith traditions and different people that just are coming together as spiritual directors or spiritual companions, right? What we teach here at the university is really spiritual direction within the Catholic Christian tradition of spiritual direction. So following that theology and the tradition. It's one of the earliest traditions of spiritual direction, and a lot of the other faith traditions really kind of branch off of the Catholic tradition for spiritual direction. But since spiritual direction really is about walking with a person in their relationship with the Lord, it always has that transcendent dimension to it. Our relationships with other people also have a transcendent dimension, but our relationship with the Lord is a supernatural dimension, and that's really what we're trying to help a person to understand and perceive. Sometimes that which is invisible to the human eye, but very visible to the human heart. So that's really where we try to focus. I hope that answers that question for Michelle.
Very good. And she has another question. I can answer this next one. So Michelle asked, is there flexibility on campus hybrid classes? I'm retired military residing in Germany. So great question, Michelle. So just as a reminder about the way that the courses are formatted. So all of the 6 courses, all 6 courses are done online, but along with that, there are some face-to-face components. So the residencies are something that you would be traveling to campus for. Your practicum hours would be done in your local area, so you don't have to travel for that. That could be done in your parish or within your apostolate or whatever's local to you. But when it comes to the residencies, because I think it's worth putting a little bit more information on that and the flexibility. So each residency is built into their corresponding courses. So the 3rd course that you're taking has a residency built into it. So it is required that once you're in that 3rd course that you do participate in that residency. But for many students, they do find themselves, maybe once they're approaching that 3rd course, I'm just using the 3rd course as an example. But for those that maybe they're approaching their 3rd course, but they know they won't be able to make a travel for that time. So if that's the case, then what I would suggest doing is maybe taking a leave of absence for that one. And then when you're ready to make that travel for that residency, that's when it would be a great time for you to jump back into the program and get reinstated back into your classes. So I don't always suggest taking a leave of absence, but if it's for a good reason, if it's because there's a wedding coming up or whatever it may be, I think these are great reasons, and that might be a good reason to take that leave of absence, and then you can jump back into the program when you're ready.
Yeah, and Becky, you know about that, right? Because you have to take some leaves of absences, right?
My daughter got married.
Exactly. Life happens. In the program, you're allowed to do up to 3 leaves of absence to take off 3 terms in different times. They can be consecutive, or they can be, just at different moments, just because life does happen at different moments. And maybe even though you'd love to stay with your cohort, you might have to take off a term for one reason or another. But as Greg was saying, the residencies are an essential part of the program, so they are obligatory. At this point in time, we don't have, we did run virtual residencies during the pandemic, but we don't do like mixed learning now. We don't do like an in-person residency and also have it be virtual at the same time, just because it's not very useful for either students, the ones that are virtual and the ones that are here. So we've just opted really for the best experience that we want the students to have, which we think is an in-person. And there are students, Michelle, that live in Europe, and they kind of, a few people they're Americans, and so they organize their coming back to the United States with a visit to their family around a residency, so they can do cross over the Atlantic just one time. And so we do have the dates planned out. So you can plan it out. It's pretty mathematical, the academic calendar. So you could plan it out if you wanted to start the program.
Can I say something? Even during the classes where there are group participations with the triads, I had people in my triads who, someone was in the Philippines, someone was in Jamaica, someone might have been in Spain, and we still found a common time to have our assignment for that week where we all met together at that common time. So we were very international within the class itself. It worked.
Thanks. Yeah, so true, Becky. That's the triads help in that way, because you're not trying to organize a group of 10 people. You're just trying to organize between three, you know, a time that works. And the students come from all different time zones and time differences. So
yeah, very good. So I'll say very quickly, because I know that we're coming to the top of the hour, but right now we're approaching the spring term. That's going to start on January 11th. That's what we are now enrolling for. We do have different start dates throughout the academic year, but right now we're focusing on the spring. And so if you're considering starting at the earliest start date coming up for January, then I would suggest starting your application process. It's very it's not very daunting. I think for many people, they think it is. They think of, you know, with the university application process, there's usually a lot more, but for this program, it's much shorter. The application form, which is on our website for SDC, very short. I think that you could probably get through that step in about 5-10 minutes. But then afterwards, the other steps would be getting recommendations. And then the third step is participating in the group interview, which is done over Zoom. So you don't have to travel for campus for that. But I would suggest, if you're really looking to start in January, I would just start with the application form for now. And that way it'll reserve a seat for you for the next cohort. And I also included a code here. Usually there's a $25 application fee, but if you submit the form using this code, then we can waive it for you. So there's a code. It's in that red box below where it says SDC REGFREE. Again, we'll make it a free application. But again, what I'd like to do is speak with each of you one-on-one if this is something that God is calling you to, so we can talk more about this and we can just go from there. So I don't think there are any more questions. Oh, you know what? There's one more question. So Dante asked, how many days are the residencies per module? Great question, Dante. So there are, you know, we say that it's a 4-day residency, but officially it's more of a 4.5-day residency. So it goes from Wednesday evening as sort of a meet and greet. So this is where all the students and the faculty will gather together on campus. And then officially Thursday morning is when the nitty-gritty of it starts. So it goes from Thursday morning until lunchtime on Sunday. So it covers over the weekend as well. So it looks like that is the end of our questions. I know that for many of you, you're still trying to wrap your heads around more questions, and that's fine. My contact information is on the screen. So when those questions come up, feel free to reach out to me. You're welcome to email me. You're welcome to call or text me. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have, and we'll just go from there. So from that point, Becky, thank you so much for sitting in with us. I always just enjoy hearing from the students, their experience in the program, because I always hear different things and different benefits that they each have. But it's really been a blessing having you sit in with us.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks for the invitation. Appreciate it.
Sure.
good to see you, Becky. God bless you.
God bless you all too.
All right. Take care, everyone. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Bye.